okay, this is now a part of your identity forever. And it's the foreverness, I think, that's so hard. There's no amount of undoing it that takes it back. There isn't a magical thinking button. And this is now your reality. So how do you assimilate it? And I had no energy to even comprehend that this would be a part of my life. And I just, at that stage, really wanted to lie down and be scooped by the very person that I'm crying over.
Welcome to The Narratives of Suicide, the podcast where we bring hope, community, and a voice to those who've lost to suicide. It's where we dispel the myths of suicide. We dispel historical discourses and constructs that have been steeped in history for a very long time, and we're here with hope, love, and support for everyone out there who needs to listen to this podcast. I'm so sorry you're here, but I do hope it can give you something to use in your healing process, to be able to pick up the pieces of suicide and put them back together again in the best possible way that you can.
So welcome everybody today to the Healing Narratives of Suicide. I'm very excited today to have our guest Olivia from North London. Olivia is a bereavement support worker for Rethink Mental Illness, which is a charity. I'm so excited to hear her perspective on supporting others through suicide loss and her own story, because Olivia's got her own story with suicide to share with us today. So thank you so much for being here, Olivia. Very excited.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a pleasure. I think I need to add a little caveat at the beginning of this to say I'll be wearing two hats in the story. One, I'm registered in South Africa as a clinical psychologist and in the UK as a counsellor. So there's one hat that I wear, and I do support after suicide bereavement for people who have lost somebody to suicide in North London. But then I also have a lived experience of suicide. My father made quite a horrific suicide attempt, which he survived, and he's still currently alive. But there have been incredible fallouts from that. And I've also lost an aunt to suicide. She completed suicide in 2011. And then I've had some friends complete suicide as well. So there's, I think, staggered grades. I've been on the receiving end of other people's grief, but I also very much wear the hats of grief and sadness within my own roadmap, I guess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So personal and professional. And I feel the same. I wear two hats as a counsellor psychologist to be as a sister lost to suicide. So it's an interesting dynamic, that, isn't it, where we speak openly about it, and how do we merge the two, maybe, because we are who we are. I am Sue, professional Sue, and personal Sue. So that brings it into our career, doesn't it? And our supporting others, how we can do that, because we're wearing both hats, and we try and wear them both carefully, professionally. And it's an interesting dynamic, I think, to say the least.
Yeah, I think especially after my dad made these suicide attempts, and in South Africa, the narratives of suicide in of itself don't really exist, especially for somebody in a professional role. I was running a trauma center at the time, and I felt just such incredible shame. If I can't keep my dad safe, how on earth am I supposed to keep other humans safe and safeguard against that? And just the struggle that I had, because cognitively, I knew all the things. I knew dysregulation, I knew shock. But it's one thing to be metacognitive about pain and kind of stand and look at yourself and say, oh, I'm bleeding. And there's another thing to actually bleed in of itself and just really be a part of that moment. And using hindsight is such, I know it's one of your favorite tools. It's the tool we need when it isn't even suitable anymore. I've been able to look back in retrospect and really see that I did not give in to the bleeding. I tried to watch it from a very distant point of view and make notes about it, just as a way of me getting through. I think wearing a professional hat felt safer, because a daughter of somebody who tried to die by suicide just seemed like an impossible label to carry.
Gosh, yeah, interesting. So you had to create some distance and wear the professional hat to put labels on things. Yeah, just to create a distance from the, like you say, the trauma, the shock, the bodily response maybe to that whole experience, which you're still living with, aren't you? You're trying to merge that, I guess, now, but in London, England, North London, as opposed to South Africa. So a lot's happened by the sounds of it. Take us back maybe to the start of that. What was your relationship with your dad like? What is your dad like maybe before he had his accident? What do you call it when is it an accident? Words would you use for that? It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose I'll have to, any good fairy tale goes all the way to the beginning, I guess. My dad has been a drug addict for many, many years. He was diagnosed with bipolar mood disorder, type 1, in probably 1980, so quite a while ago. But also in South Africa, anyone who displayed any kind of mania got tag teamed with bipolar. That was the buzzword of the day. So that was happening at the time. And he really struggled with being able to contain mood. I was born a few years later, and he was a doting father initially. I'm the eldest of 3 girls. So he's had 3 girls in total. And things seemed okay. It was a bit mad growing up, but you didn't know that it was mad just because you don't have a template for how families are meant to be. So I grew up with my dad going really, I suppose psychotic is a good word, of he would dig up the garden and put it in the house and take all the furniture and put it in the garden, or think that spirits are coming to live with us. So he would tie all the windows closed with chains. Very, very religious themes for him as well. He would open up tea bags emptied in the corners to appease things. He thought he worked for the government. And as a child, with my magical thinking and my imagination, it was the most magnificent thing. I could not understand why my mom was horrified. I couldn't understand why police kept coming over. And they still did electroconvulsive therapy and shock therapy for bipolar back then. So they would electrocute my dad for these fantasies, and he would come back and he would drool, or he'd struggle to walk. So whenever he confided in me about these fantasies that he worked for the government, or the reason he went away was in a helicopter, it seemed so real. It really played into my understanding of the world. Being 5, finding out your dad saves the world for a living is a much nicer story to believe than going away to a psychiatric institution 6 months of the year.
Wow.
And as I grew up, I guess my template for him changed. I started to understand that he wasn't just going through psychosis, it was substance induced. So he was addicted to methamphetamines, crack cocaine, and cocaine as well. And just the chaos. My mom couldn't cope with it anymore, and they divorced when I was 8. And without that structure and scaffolding of a good family framework, he really, really declined quite significantly and was homeless on and off for a few years. And I was incredibly angry at my family because I thought that they had just given up on him. And I mean, he worked for the president. How cool. Why would you chuck somebody out that works for the president?
Wow.
So that was my, I suppose, initial relation to him. I thought my dad was fantastical, and I would never believe that he used any substances. And I think that fed into, I suppose in this field, we all develop some kind of wounded healer. So I had a very overdeveloped sense of responsibility, because if I could be better, then he'd choose, very kind of classic addiction pathology. If I could be better, then he'd choose us over family. So that was the very early years and my experiences with him. Yeah, I'm not sure if you wanted to unpack anything from that, because that's quite a heavy introduction.
Gosh, yeah. I'm just thinking of you really and all of that, growing up in that, and this wounded healer archetype from young. It's all about how maybe our past hurt, pain can drive us to help other people with their hurt and pain. And in doing so, we then heal both them and us at the same time. That's the whole concept of the wounded healer, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
Hence the job you do today. But yeah, I'm just really feeling for how, as a child, you're mixed up with that mystical world, but also trying to work out what's going on around you in the physical world of people. Yeah, separating him homeless, or I guess you didn't even label it as homeless, you were too young. When did it change? I guess I'm waiting to hear what happened when you maybe realised. If you thought it was all so real and he did work for the president, when did you realise that wasn't quite true and he wasn't well, maybe?
I think as I got older, your expectation of grown-ups changed. So when you're a child and somebody says Santa Claus exists, there's no evidence required for you to really hold a footing. And when I was compared, school was a very big wake-up call, I guess, because other parents and other families didn't have their dad go away for 6 months of the year, even if they worked for really important institutions. And after my parents divorced, would visit my dad sometimes, and I'd see he was in a homeless shelter, or sometimes we'd drive around and he was begging on the side of the road. So we'd have to pull him in the car, take him to the shelter again. So our experience of him was very disenfranchised. And that was when the reality of the drugs really set in. But I was actually we call it high school. So I was probably in my 9th year of school. And I started getting all these contacts and these phone calls from drug dealers saying that I owe money to them, because my dad had started developing some form of debt. So our family was getting in trouble as well. During all of this time, as I grew older, trying to reconcile the fact that my dad was homeless, my mom had remarried, so we were living quite well, and he was living on this little, stained mattress in the middle of God knows where. My maternal aunt, so my mom's sister, she had just lost her son to a horrific car accident, and she started using substances to cope. So very similar themes, very erratic behavior. And she ended up overdosing and completing suicide in May of 2011. And that was, I suppose, the catalyst for me really understanding mental health. The family couldn't really recognize, put a ledge on it. I grew up in a very religious family. So suicide is murder, really. And if we spoke about the fact that it was suicide, my aunt wouldn't have been able to be buried. And in and amongst all of this was my dad's ongoing kind of mental health stints. And I would help him where I can, but it became a bit more difficult as my family's demands increased. And my family, with my aunt that died by suicide, I got a call while I was at school one day to say she had died of a blood clot to the lung. And I thought, that's so strange. She's 36.
Right.
How does this happen to a human? But my family just refused to acknowledge the fact that there was a suicide. So there was the shame and secrecy of, a father with addiction and mental health issues, as well as my aunt who was dealing with a complicated bereavement, and she then dying by suicide. And I think the dichotomy of the two, my family just became this almost unspeakable presence, and we were very badly ostracized in the community as well, because whatever we had must be contagious. All the bad things seem to have a ripple effect through different sides of the family.
Gosh, how did you handle that as a teen? I guess you're a teenager, you're in high school. You've got to get over the whole silence. Did you push it down then? Were you able to push it down along with everybody else? Because I guess maybe you had to in order to continue living in a community. How did you cope with that? How did you manage that as a teen?
Yeah, I think even as I tell you the story, I recognize the kind of chaos and the loudness of two very juxtaposing, chaotic stories in of themselves. And I think the noise of South Africa being a third world country, there just isn't really a lot of time you can be sad, but you can't unpack and live there in your sadness. There's just no time. So with all the admin that comes with the death, and with all the admin of being in my important years, I was in my GCSE years of school, there wasn't really time to sit and really process that A, my dad was choosing to use substances, and B, my aunt had completed a suicide, and whether choice or using it as a solution or an answer or just an escape from pain, there wasn't time to disseminate any of those differences. We were very aware of the fact that she had just gone and that she had left. And for me, I think the reality of me losing my aunt, we were at the funeral and the coffin was being lowered into the ground and we were saying our goodbyes. We were dropping sunflowers in because it was her favorite flower, and it clunked and it landed on the coffin, and there was this big echoing noise. And that for me was a very grounding, I think, reality moment where it literally hit me to say she died and we have to start speaking about things more acutely, because the grief killed her along with all of the other stuff, the blame, the shame. So that was when I thought we'd have to take a very hard look at mental health. But I internalized that in a very unhealthy way. I thought it was my job to have all of the difficult conversations with all the family members, because if I could process it for them, then it wouldn't kill them at a later stage.
Ouch. Oh, gosh, what a lot of responsibility as a teen to take on. So you felt that desire, we have to talk about this in order to help other people, basically. So then you took that responsibility on to help other people as a teen. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And being the eldest of two sisters, we all dealt with grief differently. We dealt with my dad differently. And there were cumulative stress factors. I mean, my dad wasn't there for my matric farewell. And my aunt, who was another very big part of my life, she wasn't there either. So there were big punctuation marks where I felt very important people couldn't be there because circumstances overwhelmed them. So it left a feeling of not being good enough. But I think just being very hypervigilant for people and developing quite an anxious style of relating to the rest of the world. So I felt that there was a lot of perpetual need and urgency to be with humans as close in proximity as I could, just to keep them all safe. My brain was this ultimate savior. And I thought if I could just phone everyone all the time, then nothing bad would happen.
Wow. So that celebration you described, what is that? Is that a South African celebration at the end of school?
It's a prom. It's when you're at your last year of school and you get all dressed up and you have a beautiful, so matric is our grade 12 or our 12th year of school. So just after A levels, and we all get dressed up and finish school and really speak about the celebrations thereof. And it's a big family event, but I was more aware of the holes in my family when it comes to celebrating. And I think you could probably resonate with a bit of that. It's the Christmases, it's the birthdays, where the absences are a lot more stark.
Yeah, because you look back, you reflect, you compare with other families, don't you? Do
a
comparison. Why are they still all in their unit? I'm not.
Yeah.
It's that age when you're comparing a lot as a teenager, you compare yourself constantly to all your classmates, all your friends. It's like a cool teenage thing to do, to see who you want to be, to develop your autonomy. You're looking around you to see what ideas are out there, who you can be, but you were left with no choice, I guess, because that was the situation you were in. Right, yes, I'm really feeling this, that absolute responsibility. Yeah, the hypervigilance, the wanting to save everybody at this point.
I managed to put it away. I got into university. Psychology seemed like the obvious thing. I mean, my family was so steeped in trauma. I could at least make a living making sense of it. I think charity started at home for me very much, just because there felt like there were lots of personality disorder themes going on, which is appropriate when there is so much grief and loss in a very short amount of time. So I managed to bookmark it, actually. I'd found quite a steady rhythm of interacting with my dad. I was paying for his shelter, probably seeing him once every 2 or 3 months, which was very staggered or graded just because of the safety risks. Sometimes he was a bit manic, and when he can't reality test, it made the interactions quite dangerous. But we'd fallen into a steady rhythm of, I guess, radical acceptance of his mental health. I had very little access to support. There aren't public healthcare systems that acknowledge that kind of mental health concern. And he wasn't very compliant with his medication because of the side effects. So it was very hard to regulate. So I paid for a space for him to stay at a safe haven and almost, I think, got on with my life. He would sometimes be hospitalized for doing strange things. He tried to set a police station on fire. So we got called and had to rush through. So there were pockets of time where he was very present. But I actually found those presences quite relieving because I was like, okay, he's still alive. And that means that there's hope and there's a chance. So I managed to bookmark the ultimate survivor and find a lot more meaning in studies. I think school was a great escape, a good ledge, and all this urgency I felt all the time could really be poured into just digesting books at a fanatical rate. But in 2016, this test of me needing to be this magical healer really, really got put under pressure, where I got a call from the shelter in early April, and they said, look, we don't know where your dad is. And this is not unusual. My dad loves burgers and he loves walks. So I thought, this man is just walking for a burger. I'm sure he'll be back in a day or two. He does, like the vagabond, sleep under a bridge and just go and have a little bit of an explore. So I didn't think too much of it, but a week had gone past, we heard nothing. 2 weeks had gone past, nothing. And by 3 weeks, I'd already gone into the system of every day before university, phoning all the mortuaries, all the hospitals, all the police stations. And they already knew him because he was known to services at the time. So I just said, please look out for him, and asked a few local shelters, sometimes use alias names, but he's quite short in stature and has got very big wired rim glasses. So he's quite easy to be able to discern and spot. And one of the first things that went were his shoes whenever he was in psychosis or mania. So any kind of barefoot John Does I would also use as a way to be able to identify my dad. Couldn't find him in May, and I started really giving up hope. I had this anticipatory grief of not knowing where he was and almost doing, I call it like a dress rehearsal for tragedy. So I was preempting all the suffering of all the stuff that could have happened. And I got a phone call on the 15th of June, 2016, to say that he has been in hospital for 3 months following a suicide attempt. Can I please come into the hospital?
Wow.
And I just grabbed my partner at the time and just said, we've got to go. I have to go and see him. I need to see what's happened. So that was the catalyst, I guess, for me keeping my finger off the pulse and then somebody dying. I mean, it's a false confirmation bias, but just because something isn't true doesn't mean it doesn't feel real at the time.
Yeah, tell us more about a false confirmation bias.
Yeah, thank you. So when you're going through something really traumatic or you have a template of trauma, there is something internalized, especially in your early year experiences. There's some kind of false truth your brain tells you in order to make sense of the world. and you only become heightened, reactive, or aroused by other bad things. So you look out for bad things, and you see that as a fake way of confirming that that is something that you deserve. So if you think you're an innately bad person and you step in a puddle, rather than thinking, oh, I just didn't look where I was going, you think, I'm the worst person on earth. Of course I deserve to have wet socks. And I mean, you talk on something that's very close to my heart, is the difference that I've had to make between shame and guilt, where guilt is really feeling bad for a behavior or an action, or looking back with remorse at maybe phoning him more. But it's an externalized thing because I can change my behaviors. But I think rather than guilt, I just swallowed this incredible amount of shame, which is I'm inherently a bad person. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think shame is such a deadly emotion. And I'll get to that within my dad's story. It almost killed him and continues to do so. So it's that dissemination, I guess, between the guilt of what my dad did and me not being able to preempt that versus the shame of I'm a bad person. This is why bad things happen to my loved ones.
Yeah, wow. And I guess you built up an identity around the fact you were going to save people because that's your role in your family. That was the role you took when the coffin of the sunflower, hearing that, on that responsibility, that role as part of your identity, because you're developing that as a teenager and as a young adult in university, that stage where, oh, okay, I'll go into psychology and I can help even more people. And I can actually get some labels for these things that my family are going through.
Yeah.
Develop that role as the authority, if you like, for want of a better word. You know, you were trying to develop that authority to be able to help as much as possible.
Absolutely.
So then, bang, suddenly that identity is blown up, isn't it? Because your dad fundamentally has attempted suicide and actually he's still in the hospital and been there for 3 months. So did he lose memory then? So I guess he couldn't.
Completely. Yeah. So he had lost everything. I arrived at hospital and my dad is small. I think I'm 5'11". My dad's about 5'8". So he's a tiny, tiny human. Really, really small. Maybe 5'9".
I'm 5'6". That makes me feel tiny. I'm 5'6". You're 5'11". Wow, you're tall.
Oh, wait, no, I think I'm lying. I think if you're 5'6", I probably am maybe 5'7", but he's small. He's smaller than I am. So 5'5", 5'4". And he's very small in stature as well. Really, really tall, tiny human being. And I mean, historically, he wouldn't have liked me saying that, but now I don't think he has real concept of time and size. And I arrived at the hospital, and this was normal for me. It was a local hospital where he'd been at psychiatric wards. I had admitted him ad nauseum. So the sense of relief of leaving him at a place to be looked after, I associated with shame rather than guilt. And this is maybe something we can unpack towards the end of the podcast, that especially with addiction or inpatient, there isn't a lot of debriefing for families who leave their loved ones because you feel like you're giving up on them and you don't know what's going to happen to them. And I know that there are realms of confidentiality, but you give a portion of your heart to somebody and then you walk away and you just fetch them in 3 months and have no concept of what you're going to collect. So I had a template of the hospital. My autopilot worked beautifully because I knew where it was. I could park. But somebody in a similar situation without that template, being metacognitive about the things like parking tickets and talking to security guards and trying to find out where to go, I find the frustration tolerance unhinges you a lot more. A study done by, I think it was the Johns Hopkins University, that said that frustration in people who have just experienced a trauma is a huge catalyst for a break in resiliency. So whatever your neurohormone levels, like your happy hormones, your serotonin, your sense of coping, you're really quite rigid and just trying to get through the next moment. And that's why we cry over dropping spoons of peanut butter, because it's that frustration that we can't preempt. It actually drops your hormone levels to a baseline up to 30% lower than where it usually is, which is why it feels like a catalyst. So I think in a little segue, there needs to be a lot of sensitivity for people in bereavement, grief, or shock, because anything that's irritating, if you've misspelled their loved one's name, if you can't tell them which hospital bed they're in, if there's a delay in being able to view the body, it exacerbates trauma 248%. There's one thing being cold and clinical and efficient, but cold, clinical, and inefficient, you will actually be the undoing of families who already have survived the worst case, and you are now using incompetence to really make sense of the world. And there was a security guard I keep in mind with this that just made my parking an extreme sport. I thought I was practicing for the Olympics the way he was carrying on. And I just thought, honestly, I will roll this car. I don't care if I leave it in a tree. I just need to get to my dad. There's this incredible sense of take my keys and park it. I don't care. Take my car.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to be aware of people's bandwidth immediately after trauma. And I'm sure you can relate to that. If you couldn't open your house door or your jersey hooked on your bathroom door, you're ready to just dig a hole right then and there, give up, stop being a human.
I can hear the frustration. I can hear and I love that study is giving us some labels and some terms for that. And we'll try and find the link and put it in the notes if we can find it.
Yeah.
Because it's really helpful, I think, for you to have understood that now and look back at that time when actually in that moment, I'm sure, you were where you were. It was like, just I want to go and see my dad. I don't care. And you've been waiting as well so long to find out what was happening.
Months. Yeah.
But now in retrospect, now you've done some work on it in terms of cognitively done some work on it, done some study on it. You can then reflect on that in a different place, can't you? In a more calmer place than you were in that moment. Whereas other people might develop still the shame or the guilt around that, or the
absolutely,
what was I doing in that moment? Why did I get frustrated with him? Why did I shout at him?
Yeah.
Why did I tell him off? Maybe, what did I do in that moment?
Yeah, you're so right. It's the uncontained, I call it panic vomit syndrome, PVS. This is not an official, don't Google it, it doesn't exist. But panic vomiting, we do that to each other. We fall apart with the ones that we feel closest to. And you just don't have the BS filter for the rest of the world. So like the Tesco's, please wait, someone is coming to assist you, will be 48 million times louder in your head if you're dysregulated or really freaking out. So I always recommend to people after a shock to insulate yourself. Like, don't go to Primark. You will find everyone unbearable. The harsh lighting will be too much. And then you will internalize that as you not being able to function as a human, when the reality is your brain is just trying to make you safe. And I guess at the hospital, I'm sure people listening, or at least I can hope that they can relate to this. There's lots of noise. Your cognitive load is really taken up. Your bandwidth hugely. You're looking around. There's names. It's telling you to go to the third lift on the right-hand side. I'm still wearing pajamas and sneakers. So don't tell me to go to the 15th floor, room 1A. I wish somebody was there to direct me so I didn't have to go and lead myself. And I went up to, it was the 5th floor. And I walked down this long corridor with this ubiquitous smell of antiseptic and urine, walked all the way down and went into the room. And my dad had gone from, I think he was 68 kilograms. He was probably just over 41 kilograms. So he was really, really, really skinny. All of his hair had been shaved. And my dad's name is Craig. And he had spent 3 months thinking his name was Oscar. And he woke up one morning and he remembered my cell phone number. And that's how the hospital were able to phone me. And he had broken, I think, probably close to 40 bones. He had fractured all his ribs and he'd hit his head, both in his occipital lobe, so at the back of his head, and then the temporal lobe as well. So the whole back had to be re-stitched. He had 3 neurosurgeries. He had to learn how to walk. He had a tracheostomy, so they had to intubate him to help him breathe. And the doctors and the nurses just sat me down, gave me a file of my dad in various stages of surgery, all these photos. And I still hadn't even reconciled the fact that he had attempted a suicide.
Wow.
There was just no bandwidth for it. And he looked up and he couldn't speak properly because of the intubation. And I just felt dreadful. I didn't know whether to feel shock or horror. I didn't know whether to feel anger. And I think it felt so inhumane to be angry with him that I swallowed all of the anger and I was angry with myself instead, because yes, there was a suicide attempt, and yes, there's a long, long life of addiction, but looking at him in the fragility, I did not give myself permission to be angry at him whatsoever. And I likened it to him being very ill, but I was angry at someone. I think anger, sadness in high heel shoes. So I felt these really strong emotions, and I was sitting trying to reconcile some really complicated medical reports and them saying they need to discharge him. And I'd only just seconds before find out that he was in the hospital to begin with. So really, really chaotic.
Wow. Okay. So then you're into action. You're into, right, I've got to get him home somewhere. So if you've been in there for 3 months, they couldn't continue to keep him, could they? I guess
no.
Physically well enough to go home, to go somewhere. Okay. So you're back to responsibility really quickly, aren't you?
Yeah.
Sounds like you're quite alone in that as well. I'm looking at the reports. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I've got so again, there's a responsibility there straight away, isn't there?
Being the eldest sister, my sisters have a complicated relationship with my father just because, he hadn't paid alimony, he'd never gone to school events. I mean, after we were 8, 7, and 3 months old, respectively, he wasn't very a part of our lives. So he'd alienated his own family just by stealing and robbing and doing all sorts of things. So I felt this incredible compassion and I guess sadness for him. So there wasn't anybody else to pick up that level of pain and that level of responsibility at the very least, because now he's a special needs individual. He'd had such a significant brain injury that he had lost all long-term memory. He just learned his name, but he couldn't spell, couldn't drive, couldn't use forks and knives, couldn't be left alone for too long, had to have a catheter because he couldn't regulate his own urinary system. So it was quite an intense experience.
Wow. I'm thinking of the anger as well that you mentioned, this whole sense of, and I think after any type of, whether it's suicide or death by addiction, overdose, all these kind of this complicated picture of that between suicide and the anger that comes from that as well. Like, I love the way you've described it in you, although it's horrible to hear that you went through it. You've explained it in a really lovely way that other people can't make sense of. Why am I angry? Why can I not be angry at him or her? And where do I put that anger? And sometimes that can be projected out to family members, partners, other people that were involved, police, anybody. But also it can be internalized and pushed down, internalized, especially with your identity of take responsibility for this, I'm the fixer, I'm the helper. So I didn't fix this, I didn't help this, I didn't stop this, projected down, pushed down even more. And that sounds so heavy thing to do. And I think it just speaks to a lot of people who go through this kind of grief, or not even grief, left with the effects like you've been of a suicide attempt, and you're now living still with that. To work out what to do with him now, how to look after your dad best now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the therapeutic side of me understands the compassion, the need to save. It's all about, locus of control. If I externalize that, the world just felt so chaotic and scary. It took my aunt. By this time, I'd already lost a very close friend to suicide as well from bullying at school. So there were those things in the background. But because it didn't happen to me, and I think friends of people who have survivors of suicide to friends, you don't feel like your grief is as big, or you have permission to grieve as much as family, because you're not their immediate humans. So therefore, you can't be sad because it's just attention seeking. And I had to make a very big shift over the years, and using therapy and just very good support systems that, make that shift from attention seeking behavior to attention needing behavior. That's how I helped reframe what my dad's, I think he just needed some form of attention. There was such a desperation, even the way that he'd written a note, he'd written it on the go. And you could see the pen movements, how he was walking, and that he just left the note and it fluttered down and it fell. So I had this note that he had written on the go. And he had started writing a sentence to me specifically, and the sentence was incomplete, which I think is very characteristic of what had happened with his attempt as well. And he could not remember a thing. I suppose his memory footprint was when he was maybe 28, 29. So he thought he was still married to my mom. I was a small baby. And how have I grown up so big? How have I arrived with a partner and I can read? He left me in a little yellow baby grow. And he can't understand, can you imagine, the chaotic craziness? And I still had incredible, I'm not sure if it's magical thinking or just a sense of desperate hope, where a doctor had told me that we needed to go and do a CAT scan for him to see what's happening with his brain and how his neurons are coping. And I remember walking with him and they said, Craig, please can you go stand under the red sign for the CAT scan? I lost him for a minute and just started panicking, running up and down the hospital. And he's got quite a fast shuffle for somebody that has a traumatic brain injury. This man can really move. And I remember turning the corner and he was standing under a little red fire hydrant. And that was, for me, it was that sunflower moment where I realized, okay, I've really lost my dad. Like, this is not a person that has the personality constructs that I associate with the man who taught me how to play video games or taught me how to ride a bike. This is somebody who can't read the word CAT scan and just heard the word red and is now standing under a fire hydrant waiting, just in the middle of a corridor. And he looked at me so expectantly and he says, come, we need to wait here. I don't want there to be a queue. And the sadness and the grief for me then just hit me square in the face. I managed to get him into the scan and I allowed myself 12 minutes to ugly cry in the corridor, and then really had to start understanding that this was something, I think the starkness and the permanency of the loss. And this is something I feel a lot of suicide survivors can resonate with. There's something about this that goes, okay, this is now a part of your identity forever. And it's the foreverness, I think, that's so hard. There's no amount of undoing it that takes it back. There isn't a magical thinking button. And this is now your reality. So how do you assimilate it? And I had no energy to even comprehend that this would be a part of my life. And I just, at that stage, really wanted to lie down and be scooped by the very person that I'm crying over.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Just the amount of pain that can resonate with when your life changes in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's already been hard enough in your life, hasn't it? There's enough trauma in there already. And I think we don't pay enough attention to the trauma just of dad being taken away, or dad coming back, or hearing dad homeless, or seeing dad on a stained mattress, or being taken away by the police, all those everyday things you were going through, part of your life. And this point where you're now having to live with this. And suicide survivors, I'm sure everyone can resonate with that moment when that changed, when life changed. And then you have to start rebuilding it from there, don't you, working out. Tell us more about this attention seeking and attention needing, the difference, and how you worked out the differences and what support you've had to get back from that position.
I think the narratives, at least in a third world country, and especially in a family that is so religious, that uses very external locus of control to understand things, attention-seeking behavior became something I understood in high school, in university. If you made a post on social media, which was still, in 2016, it was more in its infancy. We were integrating from BBM, using like a BlackBerry to WhatsApp. Facebook Messenger was still quite new. So people asking for help on that platform were really looked down at. If you weren't posting your lunch or the fact that you were doing something really interesting and quirky and using the new Snapchat filters, there didn't really seem like there was a space in society to say I'm struggling. And if you did, that space would be quite heavily judged. People that said that they weren't doing well got shamed quite a lot, especially in a setting like a school or a university, and even workplace. My work at the time, and I took on another job just to help pay for some of the medical bills, they kind of took a very cold, phased response. And that made me just kind of swallow again all of the responses and reactions. But for me, I think the shift change was understanding that I was actually seeing the suicide note of my dad writing it on the run, and being able to drop the expectations of who I am and what I needed from him, and almost go into the space that he was in and say, okay, a person who is in that level of desperation, he is not seeking attention. There's a shame. There's so much shame in suicide. Attention seeking would have been him. I don't know what it would have looked like, but it certainly isn't somebody who attempts suicide in various spaces. You've had so many incredibly powerful people come through and speak on the show. And I think that it's people that need support and need attention. I was listening to one of the episodes of a lady who was sharing her own experience of being suicidal. And when her mom was saying, I think you're depressed, the penny dropped where she thought, wait, I can get help for this. And needing attention is the attention that I speak about here isn't just somebody that sends thoughts and prayers, isn't just somebody that's aware. It's more shining a spotlight on the fact that you don't have to suffer. Suffering is optional, and it's not something you choose, but it's something that can really be worked through and unpacked. And there doesn't need to be so much isolation, because I think in that moment, my dad couldn't choose to stop because addiction had swallowed his life up and, really chewed him up and spat him out. But even people that do really well, you speak about your brother being, he had a great physique, he was really competent, really incredible, and there were no warning signs. And his acts and, just the spaces that they're at, it's not attention seeking. It's not them looking for pity. If anything, they escaped wanting pity, because pity would have been almost unbearable to them. It would have been, I think, almost as unbearable as shame. So I was able to, and this did not happen in the first year of my dad's attempt. This maybe happened a few years later. I was able to really disseminate that people that do this, that cry for help that we use, that's become such a cliche, I think, in modern language, is exactly that. It's somebody that is really sore and they've been bleeding for ages and they're wailing to say, can somebody stop the bleeding? I don't know what to do. I've tried to manage it using whatever coping skills, but I'm hemorrhaging now. Can you help? And that helped me a lot. It helped me be a lot more compassionate to myself and my responses and reactions to something as big as this, and to him, because the anger would have absolutely derailed me if I held on to that for too long.
Right, yeah. So attention seeking, attention needing. So you realised you weren't seeking attention in a negative way, like you may be perceived if I ask for help.
Yeah.
Instead, I need this support. I'm allowed this support. I deserve this support. And you had to work that through, which came some years after your dad's attempt, the sounds of it. Because in those immediate days, you can't even think how to live, can you, let alone make sense of all this and how to even start maybe to get support. And the job you're doing now, proactively helping people, go on to in a minute, why these services have been developed, isn't it? To help people because they can't necessarily know how to go out and get that help.
Yeah.
On a cognitive level, say, right, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go and ask for help and I'm going to go and look on the internet where to get help.
No.
When you're in that stage you were in, with trying to process the anger, the shame, which had developed as well by the sounds of it from your teenage years of a friend. We haven't really talked too much, have we? So a friend took her life after being bullied. So already developed that construct of suicide as something, again, hidden, a bit like your auntie, or hidden, shameful. We don't talk about it. We don't get help for it. We don't get support for it. We just carry on. And the support isn't there enough for friends. Absolutely 100% agree. But it's very, very significant for friends who've lost. It's still part of their identity.
Hugely.
Based on their friends. So to lose a friend in teenage years to suicide, again, it's very significant and it's not seen enough, I don't think.
No, I agree with you. And I'll share what my work does so we can end on a note that I think is a bit scaffolding, but something that really helped me be able to put a ledge. My dad is still alive. He's in a care facility that looks after him. And it was a very, very difficult journey. Dealing with the why of suicide is one of the big questions. And it's what I see with my clients in their bereavement is the why and the how. What did I do wrong? What have I missed? And I have exactly the same questions as everyone else. I cannot get access to them. I know that what my dad has had for breakfast, but I've absolutely no idea what the catalyst was. I think, do a plotting of his life and preempt that, but it's not the same. And I actually listened to a talk by Tim Minchin a while ago, and he said that suffering is something that human beings really struggle with. Suffering is something that we, just as a society, we only have enough mirror neurons to maybe take on the pain of 12 or 13 people. And mirror neurons are the little parts, little messengers in your brain that tell you, oh, baby's crying, let's react. So it's really the neurological aspects that give rise to empathy. But we can only do that for, 12, 15 people at a time. And especially in the pandemic. I mean, I saw the death tolls before I even had my first cup of tea in the morning. So there was an incredible sense, and I think there still is an incredible sense for suffering. And he said that knowing about suffering is not an impetus to do good. And you have to really make your circle of concern smaller and more meaningful so that you can sustainably help other people. And when he said that, the breath I didn't even realize I was holding completely expelled out of my body. It was so beautiful to hear. Number one, being witness to suffering is tragic, and hearing people struggle, especially when it's similar themes of tragedies you've experienced. There's this pull to do something. It's probably a bit overdeveloped in mine. If it was an Olympic sport, I'd have a gold medal in being over helpful. But making your circle of concern smaller and choosing who you can be with so that my presence is more deliberate rather than smearing yourself thin and nobody gets the best version of you. So when I visited my dad, I made sure that I was so deliberate and intentional about being the best person for both of us, but authentically being able to say, look, Dad, he doesn't understand the word saturated, but I'm really tired. How about I phone you later on tomorrow? And being able to put those boundaries down because I did feel that there was a lot of hemorrhage. So that was the one thing that really, really gave me incredible amounts of scaffolding. And I think just for people who are listening, if you're in the infancy of loss, to just be aware of how much your body responds to trauma and to be so gentle. Sue and I actually discussed this before the podcast, that traumatic stress and grief isn't really paid enough attention to. So I think that the trauma, smells, sights, sounds, things being really loud and jumpy, there's a lot of onus that we have to prepare for the fact that the body has gone through a shock. And it's not just you having this paradigm shift of a new identity. So I wanted to really say that before we discuss my role a bit more and tell people exactly what I'm up to now and where I've been able to assimilate some growth, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It's so important to recognize what place you're in afterwards. And I love the word grace. Give yourself grace. Always give yourself
It's a beautiful word.
Grace to be wherever you are right now, whatever you need to do right now, however you need to express it right now. Giving yourself grace and time and space. And unfortunately, as humans, we're always looking to where we can improve, where we can get better. When's this going to end? When's this? And sadly, it's one of these positions where we have to give ourselves grace while that period changes, shifts all the time, and every day isn't quite predictable.
Yeah.
Give yourself grace and space to do what you need to do. Love that. Love that you've reflected on that in terms of your own understanding now. And yeah, I know you mentioned boundaries as well, how you started to put boundaries in place with your dad, I'm really tired, I can't come tonight, and how you learned that. You've had to learn how to do that, especially where you're still living, taking responsibility, because he's still there needing looking after, isn't he? So at the end of it, and there's anticipatory grief we haven't really unpacked, but there's quite a lot here to unpack. We maybe need to do another episode on some of the other aspects, because anticipatory grief, again, is something that if someone's dying of an illness, you kind of say goodbye as when my mum died of an illness, we were told she had 6 months left to live. I said goodbye in those 6 months. She actually lived for 3 years. But in those 3 years, I said goodbye really slowly and watched her deteriorate to the point where when she died, there was actually relief for me that she was in peace and she was calm, because I'd done a lot of the grieving before she died. With my brother, no warning whatsoever. So boom, straight into the grief process and the trauma and the shock.
So jarring. Yeah.
So it's very different. But you have also got that anticipatory grief now because you're living with a dad that you don't recognise maybe as your dad. So you've still got that ongoing, haven't you, really? You're living with that now, the anticipatory grief. And so you came from South Africa to England?
Yeah.
In amongst all of that at some point?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in my spare time, I emigrated last year during the pandemic, actually.
Oh, right.
And I found it was all happenstance, really. I found this incredible organization called Rethink Mental Illness. And they had just developed this new role, which is emotional support worker for bereavement after suicide. It's a very long email signature, so I don't expect you to get it the first time. And I just thought, what on earth is that? And really, after a suicide in North Central London, whether you've been bereaved by a suicide very recently and you're in your infancy or it's been years, there is no roadmap or very little roadmap of what to do next. And I mean like inquests and how to register the death and investigations. And if it happened in a trust or within a hospital or it was sudden or you need to speak to the police. So we provide, very practical therapeutic goals, but also I'm people's auxiliary brain. I literally go to the police and I sit in a queue for 5 hours and I wait for a cell phone that the police took for whatever reason. Or I will speak to somebody and understand who they were in relation to the person and really help them with the paradigm shift. Just hold, just emotional, that trauma vomit that I spoke about earlier, so that it doesn't splash on all the family around, which is quite crude, but I mean, suicide bereavement is that. And we have an added value to the service where we get updates from the police who have been amazing through all of this. And they actually give us people's contact numbers of recent suicides in the area. And we do calling. So we phone people rather than send out flyers, because I find flyers, posters, they're as helpful as a watermelon in a hurricane. No one is going to read your 4-page flyer in the infancy of grief. At a later point where you have reflective space to read, absolutely. But you literally need a human to come into the house and say, right, this is what you have to prepare for next, because everything's up in the air and everyone tries to catch everything simultaneously. And it's all free. We're commissioned by local authorities and we help people for up to a year, and all of it's flexible. So it's very client-led, and we have some support groups in it as well. And it could be anything, from telephonic support to going just for a walk to process, and then signposting to eye movement, EMDR therapies, or other kind of talks and psychotherapies as well, depending on what the needs are.
Great. Wow. And you're doing the cognitive work that they can't do. So
Absolutely.
We talked about the work, we haven't talked about working memory, but I relate it to the working memory's only got a certain capacity.
That's it.
You can only so much in one go. When you're trying to feed the children at the same time as balance your spreadsheet at the same time as talk to your son. You've only got so much you can do in that cognitive load. It's like a computer.
Absolutely.
Hardware storage. And when you lose some of that to a trauma, let alone suicide grief, any kind of grief, when you lose any of that capacity just because you are very heavily emotionally, things are very heavy emotionally.
Well, you're saturated, aren't you? So full. Yeah.
And I think even if something really difficult happens in the morning, you have an argument with your son, just say, or daughter or partner, even in the morning, and you go to work and you try and switch on your computer and do something really demanding cognitively, you just can't. I find I just can't do it, and I have to give myself space and grace until I am ready to sit down and do that academic work. And unfortunately, society doesn't let us always give us that space and grace to, if you've got to be there at 9, you've got to start. We don't always take account of that. I think that we've only got a certain amount of cognitive space and we need to respect that. And it sounds as if you and your service offer that cognitive space that they haven't got by doing the sitting and waiting for the phone, telling them what they need to do. Because you do silly things, don't you? Like put your keys in the fridge, all that almost laughable things that seem ridiculous, but that's the grief fog effect.
It is so true. And we do even phased returns to work. We call GPs, we get your meds delivered to your house, change addresses. And I think it's the episodic tearfulness. It's the howling over your laptop. It's also giving you the psychoeducation that the reason why the train is so jarring is the noise, the saturation level. And when you're dysregulated, everything is an extreme sport. Grocery shopping is one of the themes that people struggle with the most after a bereavement, because there's something about the rest of the world just grabbing, having the luxury of being frustrated that their brand of milk is not on the shelf. And there's something unhinging about picking up toothpaste that your person who died always got and knowing that you have to put it down. We've worked with clients who have lost partners who have said that some of the more difficult things were things you never prepared for. Like the fact if you buy movie tickets, they only sell them in pairs. You cannot buy one movie ticket. So if there's anything to say, hi, I'm alone, my loved one died, it's inescapable, isn't it? If you sit alone at a restaurant, they immediately look up to see who else. So there is that narrative you were talking about of togetherness, or updating people about, if they'll ask how your brother is, and you've got to rehash the story all over again, and you become desensitized to it to some degree. There's so much around all of it. And we just want to be a safe space, really, to be the cognitive and sometimes even the champion for you to help you make sense of all the paperwork, because that is inundating. We give people, I guess, permission to grieve, and then we'll do all the legwork in the background.
Let's give people permission to grieve. Whoa. Suicide has brought you to London to help other people, hasn't it, really?
Absolutely.
With your studies, which you did because of your really wanting to help. So that responsibility you took on has made you who you are today, but actually brought you to London, where I hope you're happy. I'm never going to assume, but you've still got your dad in South Africa, I guess, trying to adapt to that from London. There's such a lot there, isn't there? There's such a lot, and it's all really significant things. And I can just really tell how your journey has been involved with mental health, suicide, like mine. I actually started doing a psychology degree because my son was really struggling at 5 years old and was nearly diagnosed with ADHD, Asperger's, and which we don't use anymore, but at the time it was that. And they said, we'll put him on some Ritalin, see how he goes. And I just said, no, I'm going to do a psychology degree to try and work this out myself, because I just couldn't. I felt so useless and hopeless. So then
that's it. It's the helplessness, isn't it?
My psychology degree helped me gain some control, understand autism, understand ADHD, understand all these things he was being diagnosed with, and then be the best mother. And I always think my son took me on that journey, a bit like your dad maybe and your family took you on that journey, and it made me who I am today, which actually I'm proud of who I am today in terms of all that I'm doing to try and help other people. But we have to keep boundaries around that. How do you do that? How do you boundary everything that you've been through and working with people with suicide grief?
I wish I could tell you I'm good at it. It's one of my ongoing life skills. I think what I've had to acknowledge and understand about myself is I have two modes when I'm stressed. I have depleted Olivia, and then I have completely saturated Olivia. So depleted Olivia just consumes reality TV, just consumes food. I find that I crave textures of what's happening around me. So I'll eat popcorn, apples, anything I can really bite my teeth into. I'll need to carry a hot water bottle. I need to have very tight clothing. I actually have a weighted blanket I drag around with me at home. But then saturated Olivia is a different animal completely. When I'm overwhelmed, I can't listen to music. I can't listen to podcasts. And when I'm depleted, I can't do things like exercise. There's no energy for me to give. So hot salt baths really help. Drinking tea, having very soupy, warm. I find chia butter with olive oil and parmesan. It is my therapeutic go-to. I've never had a bad experience with bread, and I've never been nauseous with bread either, which helps people that struggle with bowel-related issues after grief. And then saturated Olivia, cannot listen to things. I try RuPaul's Drag Race when I'm really saturated and it's just irritating. I want to shut Netflix down. So in those moments, I have to exercise, I have to move. I have to really try and empty that bucket that's so full. So it depends. And I think the starting point is to recognize the emotional space that you're in and adjust to it rather than throwing all the tools at within your toolbox at you, and then being upset when it doesn't work. So that's really helped me, being able to disseminate between the two and respond appropriately.
So you had to learn how to learn your the nuances of yourself, the nuances of every moment and every day, and which Olivia, if you like.
Yeah.
Same Olivia, but which Olivia is going to be there in terms of feelings, how
absolutely.
You've got that whole rainbow spectrum of feelings within you to be aware of, to be mindful of, and then to treat with respect and care when it's saturated with all of those techniques. And I'm guessing you've done that through therapy. You have mentioned therapy, you've had some support, you've had therapy.
Oh yeah, no, my therapist is wonderful. I secretly want to steal her and put her in a box and just carry her around. She's so helpful. She really assisted me with understanding, when you mix awe, or somebody that you were always in awe of, like a dad, and you mix fear together, almost like mixing two primary colors together, you get horror. So that's why horror is such a key emotion. And I mean, that was such a mic drop when she was able to narrate that for me. It was hugely beneficial. I was in therapy for 2 years just to understand where I started, and everyone else's grief started as well, because I used to have the boundaries of an amoeba, but I've got a very strong cell wall now. Yeah, so therapy, I advise for plus. I still access support as and when needed, because it's an ongoing journey. Being a human is tough. It's hard work.
Yeah, and supervision, I guess you get supervision to do your job.
Oh yeah,
a lot of
ad nauseum.
Yeah, clinical supervision to offload some of this safely about your client work, vital, which I don't think people recognise enough. Wow, what a story. We've been speaking for a long time. I don't want to take up your time anymore. I'm really humbled and so pleased you've come to share with us today your story, because it's been such an eye-opening for me, let alone anybody else who's listening. I hope it's the same, and I hope it's helped people with understanding the whole addiction story, which isn't seen enough and heard enough, and that shame and guilt. I love the way you've explained that in terms of the guilt is a behaviour, and how when you take somebody in for an addiction, you still have the shame. You might not have the guilt. You have the shame of, what do I do now? And you're left with so many impacts of that again, but that maybe is for another podcast. And Rethink Mental Illness, let's just quickly mention how people can get hold of you if they're in North London. Is it only available to people in North London, I'm guessing?
So if the bereavement happened in North Central London, if there were any suicides within that, or you stay in one of the 5 boroughs, and we'll put that in the link as well as my email address, and then people can just access as and when need be. And you can go Google stalk us at any time. We're very open and transparent.
Great. So you offer support up to a year, but any time after the death?
Absolutely.
So even if 20 years ago, you can still help them, but up to a year, you'll help them forward. Is that the way it works? Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for joining us here today. I hope it served you and given you something for your journey with suicide. Come back and subscribe, do whatever you need to do on your platform to help us to raise awareness of suicide, because the more we keep saying the word, the more we can gain support for us left behind, and the more we can raise awareness of the word and how society sees it, and reduce this stigma that's so attached to it. Please get in touch. You can find me on my website, suicidegriefsupport.com. I really want to hear from you. But for now, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And remember, we are stronger together.